Hey everybody, just wanted to get back with you. Sometimes the Lord puts me in quiet time to be with Him and to really get an understanding of what He's trying to lay down, and then I have to marinate with it, and then I'm ready to share some of it with you. The first thing I just wanted to say is that sometimes, the enemy and the adversary is doing just little things to irritate you, the chosen ones, the set apart ones. And it could be like just stupid traffic, just angry drivers on the road. Like I got to this park, and I had a certain small plan, if you will, and this guy was sitting right next to me with his loud music, and it was every other word is F this, and it's just exhausting sometimes because it's you want to do good for God, and meanwhile it's everything around you is just screaming that it doesn't want God. And it just makes me think of Jonah, and that's why he didn't want to go to Nineveh. He just really didn't want to help the people. He didn't want to save the people because the people were really rotten, and sometimes I feel like that. I get very frustrated that, I'm trying to do good to bring people to who God is, and meanwhile, the warfare that's around is just, it's so intense sometimes. And I know I put on the armor, I pray it away, and I'm sitting there in my truck, and I'm like, Lord, if you want me to do what you want me to do at this spot, I need this guy to disappear because I can't do it. And as soon as I was okay, I'm just going to go on the trail first, and then I'll do the Bible study second, because my thought was the opposite way, the Bible study first and the trail second. And this guy's music was just so annoyingly loud. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do the trail first. And I prayed that this guy would, it's really muddy here. I prayed that this guy, hi little birdie, so pretty. This guy would just stop and get away. And then as soon as I got on the trail, it's he's gone. His car pulled away. So when I return back to my spot, I'll do a full Bible study. So right now, I'm just going to highlight the points, so thank you for joining me. I would really appreciate it if you would smash the like button and make comments, if you will. It really does help me, and I know that this is a baby channel starting up all over again. I'm just being obedient to what God is asking me to do. Sometimes it's not fun, but I do it anyway. So here we go. So I have been in 1 Kings in the Bible for the past day or so. And, certain parts were highlighted, that the Lord was really getting me in a deep study over. And one of the main things that I really saw, and sometimes we have to read things several times to connect the dots and understand what God's trying to show us. And in this case, what I really saw was that, in the beginning, when David, knowing that he was dying soon, he gives, he turns the crown over to Solomon, and King David emphasized that Solomon really needed to keep God's commandments. He really needed to keep the statutes and the precepts, and that it was really important for Solomon to keep that, because the reason why Israel was blessed was because David and his heart was pure, and because David was keeping the commandments. And it doesn't mean that we all don't sin, but the point is that whenever David did sin, he had a heart for God. He immediately, confessed his sins, repented, and the Lord blessed him because of the way that David was an honorable man, that he did his best, and when he failed, he confessed, and he did whatever he could to be right with God. So David saying to Solomon, his son, who's about to become king, hey, you gotta follow the Lord's commandments. This is Israel. And Solomon said it with words that he would follow. But as I kept reading in Kings, what I really saw was that when Solomon knew that he was weak, and that David had some other son as well, and the other son was trying to claim the throne, whatever. I mean, there's always some kind of sibling rivalry that's in many of these stories, but the bottom line is that the other son was strong, and he was a warrior, and Solomon was a weaker person. And as Solomon prays to God, he's like, give me wisdom. And many of us would think, well, wisdom is a good thing, right? And so I really started to think about how back in the Garden of Eden, the reason why we all are the subject of sin is because Eve and Adam and Eve, fell prey to sin. And the sin that Eve was deceived by, it was, pride and her desire for knowledge. And so as I was reading, all this stuff in Kings about Solomon, and I started to see that Solomon, although he asked the Lord for wisdom, and the Lord granted him wisdom, the Lord also said, as long as you keep my commandments. So the Lord emphasized the first time an angel came to Solomon and said, you've got to keep my commandments. And Solomon's like, yeah, I will. But what's the first thing that Solomon does? He goes and marries the Pharaoh's daughter as his first wife. And, we could sit here and say, well, since Solomon was ordained by King David to build the temple, and because David had blood on his hands from being a warrior and Solomon didn't, and so God said that Solomon would build the temple. And so David, when he anoints Solomon as king, he tells him, you're going to build the temple. So again, you would think that someone who is given this important, responsibility to build the temple, that he would take it seriously. But Solomon goes and marries the Pharaoh's daughter. Now, if we think about the Egyptians, and we think about the pyramids, and we think about all the different, let's just say, labor technologies that they employed with sand and stone, etc., and that Solomon is becoming wise because the Lord said that he would give him wisdom. And if Solomon thought, well, if I marry the Pharaoh's daughter, maybe I'll get some of the Egyptian secrets about how to build properly. And even if all that is true, and it seems like it was because of the way that the Ark of the Covenant was hidden, etc. The point is that, future later on. The point is that Solomon still disobeyed God, disobeyed the commandments by marrying his first marriage to an unequally yoked woman who happened to be the Pharaoh's daughter. And so we see that his downfall begins with that. And the reason for that is that, of course, Pharaoh's daughter is going to be paying homage to other gods, not the true God of Israel. And so here's the irony. Here's Solomon. He's building this temple for God, the God of Israel, and simultaneously he marries the Pharaoh's daughter, and the Pharaoh's daughter is paying homage to all these other gods. And as David is building the temple for God, David also decides that he's going to build a house for himself. So again, that's where the pride and the ego and the vanity get in. And he gets, excited about his wisdom. And he thinks, well, while I'm doing this, I might as well do that, right? And then, he's building houses for, I forgot the part about taking on other wives. So the point is, the first wife, the Pharaoh's daughter, that's bad enough, okay? But he ends up taking on wives, and I think it was something like Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's a lot of women to be dealing with, okay? And managing. And of course, he's producing children from all these various women that have various gods and various idols and various different ways of practices. So the whole point is, Solomon was tainting his seed, okay? And that's not what God wanted. And as Solomon married each woman, he would then build altars to these other women wherever their hometown was, and he would allow them to have their religious practices separate and independent simultaneously while he's ruling Israel for the, quote, one true God, which again is oxymoronic. It's saying one thing and doing another. And so as I really started to see this, I was like, wow, like it was off to a bad start when he first married a woman that he was unequally yoked to. It went to a really, complicated, chaotic mess as he continued to be, as King Solomon, continued to be obsessed with the lust of having many women. And those many women, he was building all these altars of idolatry to all these other gods, and he was not being true to the one true God of Israel. So this is angering God. God's not happy with Solomon. And yet Solomon has this great wisdom, right? And when we read the Proverbs, it's like, wow, this is so great. And the point is, all these thoughts came out of Solomon. And I think the thing that I started to think about is like, there's this movie called The Pilgrim's Progress. If you haven't seen it, take a look at it or read the book, The Pilgrim's Progress. And there's a part where the guy Christian, who's on this journey and he's trying to get to the the eternal city. The point is, he comes across this man who is like Mr. Worldly Wise or something was his name. And the point is, he presented himself as someone who had all this amazing, wonderful information. And so Christian gets totally deceived by this Mr. Worldly Wise. And, he goes down the wrong path. And essentially, that's the parallel I'm trying to make right now, is here's Solomon going, I'm weak. Therefore, like he didn't see himself as a strong warrior. So he's like, give me wisdom. And so God gives him wisdom. But because of his lust for women, it tainted his mind. And even though he spout out all this great wisdom, For what? You know, he deceived himself, he angered God, and he caused a lot of division among the people of Israel because of his behavior. And so that's where I just wanted to bring back the whole idea that, you know, we have thoughts, and those thoughts become words, and then the words become deeds, and then the deeds become habits, and then the habits become patterns, and then the patterns become part of our character. And, you know, Solomon may have, you know, built the temple, but let's be realistic. King David, who had a heart for God, built the plans for the temple. So it was King David who really was listening to God and what God wanted in terms of the temple itself. And King David, his heart was pure for God, and he followed God's commandments, he followed the precepts, he followed the statutes, and he wanted to bring glory to God in everything that he did. And that's why the people loved David, because he truly had a heart for God. And when we, again, look at Solomon, although Solomon had wisdom, and although Solomon did complete the, quote, construction of the temple in Jerusalem, the point is Solomon's focus was more on vanity and beautification and being sidetracked with the lust of many women. And because of it, he divided the nation of Israel, and he angered God. And so I think the lesson here is just that, how can we apply this to ourselves? Like, if we have the heart of David, then that means that we're following God's commandments. And if we have the heart of David, that means that we're cultivating a personal relationship with God. We want God first above everything else. And we're willing to take a stand for that no matter what. And we're willing to accept whatever consequences that God puts on us, because we understand that God's righteous and we make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we confess and we say, Lord, you're absolutely right. I deserve this, right? But the thing is that it's when we are like Solomon, when we are in our ego, when we are in vanity, when we are in this wisdom that is really like, it's eating and drinking from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's the other parallel I wanted to bring in, is that, you know, in the Garden of Eden, when Eve wanted the wisdom and the knowledge to be like God and to know other things, that was the desire that made her sin, and then encouraged Adam to sin. And the bottom line is they both sinned, okay? But it was their desire that the fruit looked good, and it tasted good, and it had this, promise of something more. And I think that's what wisdom can do when we are seeking to gain, quote, worldly wisdom. And again, I'm making the parallel that Solomon was really about worldly wisdom, because he was seeking the wisdom of all the women that his wives that he was married to, and their cultures and their idols. He was seeking the wisdom of learning merchants and trades and spices, and he made wealth for Israel, but he did it without focusing on God, and he wasn't in the Bible studying what God said about his commandments and his statutes and his precepts, which were way more important than studying the cultures of 700 wives and 300 concubines that were going to give him, quote, worldly wisdom. And I think that's the point that I'm just highlighting, that I feel like God was showing me, that there's a lot of worldly wisdom around us, okay? And the question is, that's all nice, okay? It is nice. There are some great sayings in Proverbs. There are some great things that, people of, quote, wisdom can share with us, whether it's about business or whether it's about, how to clean your house or whatever. I mean, there's so many different tips that people can give us, and they're all good. They're worldly advice. But I think the caution here is that, again, on Solomon's deathbed, to his next, son in line, he's saying, keep God's commandments, which shows that Solomon had the regret. In the end, Solomon realized that all that wisdom that he had really didn't mean much because he disobeyed God. And by disobeying God, he injured the Jewish people. He injured Jerusalem with his idolatry that he brought on himself by being married to all those other women and all their idolatry and all their practices that, quote, gave him wisdom, but it wasn't God's wisdom. It was the wisdom of the world. So that's my take on it. I hope that helps, and hope you have a good day, everybody. Bye.